I just hit 9,000 snap points running an Infinity Ultron Victoria Hand Ancient One deck that I made myself. I'm going to be taking you through the deck building of it, how it works, and at the end, I'm going to be showing you a little bit of gameplay so you can better understand how the deck works and how you can use it in your own games. This is the Victoria Hand deck that I used to hit 9,000 SP this season. It is a build that I myself made. It is an Infinity Ultron Victoria Hand deck. I have been working basically on this deck since Infinity Ultron got buffed to 2-cost stones, because I figure the stones with Quinjet is a very powerful combination considering Victoria Hand. I was right. I think that this deck is extremely well positioned. I think it's extremely strong, and I think it's much more resistant to tech, although harder to play into most metagames, while still having the same point ceiling and even a higher one. What this deck interestingly does is you can actually be able to get a ton of Victoria Hands without messing up your curve pretty much at all with Luna Snow. Being able to do stuff like Victoria Hand Frigga on 4 into like IU Quinjet on 5 is a little bit crazy, because it permits you to do stuff like Victoria Hand plus 2 IU stones plus like Speed or AntiVenom on 6, and that's just a pretty strong thing to be doing. You can also be miserying for just a 9-power body. I think that this deck has a lot of different playlines, and I think it's probably the most fun I've had with the deck this season. I love this deck, and I'm excited to show you all how to play it. So the first thing I'm going to be talking about is I'm going to be talking about the deck building process in which I made this deck. This was my first draft of Infinity Ultron Victoria Hand, and this deck was good, although it did have a couple of glaring problems. With the release of the Ancient One, I definitely thought that was a very strong piece, potentially in Victoria Hand, especially since the buff that it received. I think that there was a lot of stuff in this deck that was pushing up against each other, and I'm going to sort of detail it now. You might notice that this list is 2 cards off from the one I just showed, those being Mirage and Speed for Mobius and Iron Patriot. I'm going to explain why those 2 cards didn't work before I get to why the other 2 did work. Mobius didn't work because it's just 2 little points. The 3/3 is good, and it flips your matchup versus Mr. Negative, but you can go taller than the other decks that Mobius can help you with Speed, and Speed can also help you in the matchups where you need to go tall, but Mobius just isn't tall enough, and it's not really stopping what your opponent is doing. What Iron Patriot did is, Iron Patriot's doing good stuff. IP with Quinjet is good, it's pretty much all IP, but IP cards tend to cost pretty high. Like, even after discounts, 6s cost 3, 5s cost 2. Like, in a deck where I'm really trying to optimize my low curve, hitting a 6 cost is devastating, because that takes up a lot of your turn 6 play, which you really want to be doing, like the Demons and the IU Stones at V-Hand. You really want to be doing other stuff on 6 than playing your IP card if it costs 3. You really want your turn 6 to be mostly filled of 1 and 2 cost plays. So Iron Patriot is sort of not working with what the deck wants to do with its Victoria Handed cards, which is why I looked at other 2-cost card generators, because I definitely think you needed a 2-cost card generator in that spot, but I thought Iron Patriot was a little bit too heavy for my curve. So after a few hours of testing, I ended up landing on this specific 12. So first thing, I'm going to be talking about Mirage and Speed just as a whole. I think these 2 fit the game plan better, because you want your generated cards to cost lower, and Mirage is very good at that. Mirage is very often playing a 1 or a 2-cost card, which with Quinjet basically makes them both 1-cost cards, which is extremely strong for your final turn play. Speed is also the second Ancient One hit that this deck needed. It also gives it the ability to go tall instead of go wide, and that's also something that this deck was missing in the previous iteration. On to the card by card breakdown. Hood is obviously plan A. This guy gives you 1/6s that get buffed by your archetype, sort of centric 2/3. I think that this is pretty strong to be doing, and you can repeat this effect with a Misery, who is a 4/9, which is quite a little bit ridiculous. I think that Hood is really the bread and butter of this deck. It's sort of what the deck's points package relies on, and it's definitely your best lines. But there's also some variations where you're not really wanting to use the Hood, especially in a matchup where you know they have a Killmonger, where the Hood is really just, you're just adding negative value because the energy invest is just going to get blown up at the end. We really want to be leaning into other stuff, sort of trying to Mirage a 2-drop and Misery the Mirage instead of the Hood, and get your Infinity Ultron stuns that they can't Killmonger. Quinjet is a very interesting one. This is where I'd want to start talking about the deck building and considerations that went into this deck. Infinity Ultron, who is sort of one of the hallmarks of this deck and what I sort of built around when I was building this deck, has 2 cost stones. Quinjet reduces that cost by 50%. That is extremely significant enough an interaction where I can warrant building an entire deck out of it. Reducing something's cost by 50% is sort of why Sarah used to be such a dominant deck in the past. Reducing the 2s that you could play like Maximus to 1 cost and even old Hitmonkey was pretty much the most powerful thing you could be doing. A 50% discount is quite rare in this game, and when you can get one, you're going to try to build around it and see if you can reasonably do it. I think that what Quinjet allows you to do with pretty much no investment in playing the card is it smooths out a lot of your lines. There's some very interesting lines you can play on 4 and 5 with a Quinjet, especially with Victoria Hand and Frigga. There's some very interesting stuff you can do with Misery, and you can basically get 3 Victoria Hands and 2 Demons going into turn 6, which is a little bit crazy with Quinjet and Lunas now, and that's just pretty much you've won the game. There's just so much power on the board. I really think that Quinjet is sort of the line smoother. A lot of the curves in this deck feel very smooth in the sense that you're using a lot of your energy on each turn, using pretty much all of it, and you're using it to sort of accelerate what you're doing faster than the opponent can accelerate what they're doing, which is sort of the hallmark of any Luna Snow deck. Quinjet allows that to happen. So this entire deck was sort of built around that Quinjet IU synergy and sort of maximizing both cards outside of that. The next card I'm going to talk about is Mirage. This was the slot that took the longest to figure out of any of the slots in the deck. I knew what needed to be in the slot. I knew a 2-cost card generator needed to be in the slot. But the question was which was correct. It was either Kate Bishop, was it Mirage, was it Iron Patriot, or was it Valentina? Those are the 4 main ones that I considered, and I eventually landed on Mirage being the best one. This again goes into the deck building considerations of my deck. You're trying to get, basically on the last turn of the game, you're trying to play realistically like 4 1-drops in speed, or 5 1-drops and like a rogue 2-cost, like maybe a Victoria Hand in your hand that you didn't play out before. You're trying to play a lot of cards that cost 1, whether they naturally cost 1, or by a Quinjet discount on the final turn of the game. What Iron Patriot and Valentina do is they don't give you that 1 cost. They're going to give you, most of the time, like 3 cost, and although Iron Patriot can get a 2 cost, you're also further investing in that lane, which sort of makes your power allocation, which is very important in this deck. You can really choose where the power goes on 6. It makes your power allocation a little bit harder to do, so I definitely thought that Iron Patriot felt clunky with the overall strategy of this deck, even though it can get some cards down to similar cost as Mirage. Whereas Mirage does not have that cost like Iron Patriot, and instead realizes the value immediately and gives you a card that, in all likelihood, is going to cost 1 on the final turn of the game. I think that Mirage is definitely the right card in this slot, and I heard a lot of, when I was talking to top Infinite players, I heard that why not Kate Bishop? Why is Kate Bishop not in here? This deck has hand space issues, as most Victoria Hand decks do. There's not really an issue for Victoria Hand targets. There's an issue with hand space. So I knew that I wanted a 1-card generator in this slot as well. Because of Infinity Ultron, you really want to be able to draw and get the 2 stones on 6, which with a deck that's focused on generating cards in your hand or returning cards to your hand is really hard to do. Mirage sort of makes it possible to be able to do that. With Mirage, you're able to fit in that curve at the end of the games more smoothly, and you're also able to free up your hand space easier because it's only generating 1 instead of 2. If you're not running a combo deck, I feel like you need to be running some sort of tech in this game. I think Shadow King is an extremely good tech option in this deck. 1, because it synergizes with AntiVenom, and 2, because it deals with a lot of threats in this metagame. Stuff that scales is very important. Like, I know there's a lot of Gwenpool decks in the metagame, especially one with Mr. Sinister. Shadow King sort of owns that, and it sort of takes out the reason why they run Sinister. He costs 2, he's an amazing turn 6 play, and you can fit him into your curve quite easily. I think that this card is pretty underrated right now, as a whole, I think that he has a lot of targets in this meta that's centralized on tech piles with buffs. I think that Shadow King sort of flips your matchup into a lot of those decks, and it also gives you sort of an over the top. Like if your opponent's relying a lot on green power, Shadow King plus Demon can honestly just win a lane. I know there's a lot of Bishop in the current metagame as well. This guy just kind of destroys Bishop. He turns Bishop from a 3-10 to a 3-2 on the last turn of the game, maybe 3-4 if you have priority, or if you have priority. So I think that Shadow King is very strong, and what he does in this deck is he justifies the AntiVenom, which lets you cheat out energy and helps you with your hand space, because you're going to be able to play a card and then play like your Infinity Ultron, which guarantees you have a draw. And I think that he justifies that AntiVenom, which is pretty important in this deck. And what he also does is he offers you tech and interaction against other decks. I think that this guy is definitely the best tech card for this deck, just by the virtue of him costing less and him being so powerful and flipping a few matchups that are important. I think that this guy is very strong. He has a lot of good synergies in this deck, and I definitely think that if you're running this deck, there's really no room for many other tech cards other than this guy. Everybody knows what Victoria Hand does in the Victoria Hand deck, so instead I'm going to be talking about the lines that you can use with Victoria Hand. Obviously, Victoria Hand is the card you want to frigga the most in this deck. When you frigga a Victoria Hand in this deck, there's a few things that you really need to keep in mind. One, can I get another Victoria Hand? The answer most of the time is yes. So there's two ways you can do this. First of all, what you can do is you can use the Ancient one to copy Victoria Hand's text onto cards like Demons or Mirage, stuff like that. The second way you can do it is by using your Luna Snow ramp to be able to copy a second Victoria Hand with a Misery to frigga. So, you can either have Quinjet on the field, which lets you V-Hand Misery on 5, or if you have Luna Snow ramp, you can play, which is a very interesting line, you can play Victoria Hand Frigga into Victoria Hand Misery, getting 3 Victoria Hands on the field, 2 of which are created, and you can also trigger like a Hood with that Misery, which is also very cool. What you can do is if you have a Quinjet on the board, after Victoria Hand Frigga, you can play Hood, Victoria Hand, Misery on the lane with the Frigga and the Hood, copying a Victoria Hand and giving you 2 demons on that turn. It's a crazy pop-off that you can do in 2 turns, and when you've done that, you've pretty much won the game. You can have like Shadow King in your hand for interaction. You've got 4 generated cards, 2 of which are Victoria Hand and 2 of which are demons. I think that that line is extremely powerful and something you really need to keep in mind when playing this deck, because I definitely think it's probably your best line that you can be doing. That doesn't involve Infinity Ultron, which I'll get to later, but I definitely think that Victoria Hand in this deck is one that tries to cheat out a lot of game pieces using Luna Ramp. Victoria Hand is the most effective game piece to cheat out by copying and doing all of the scammy stuff that this deck does with Frigga and Misery and sort of really trying to be greedy and go over the top. This card is your number 1 priority in this deck. It's more important than the Hood, because the Hood dies to Killmonger. Victoria Hand does not die to Killmonger, it only dies to Enchantress. Really, so I definitely think that this card, the more you can get of it, the more you're going to have a better chance of winning. And the more you focus on how you can copy this card, the more fluid your lines will seem in this deck. Second, one of the new additions to this deck, Speed allows you to go tall, while Victoria Hand allows you to go wide. This guy is what the deck was missing. I've played a lot of Victoria Hand in the past, more specifically the Husky Puppies version of Victoria Hand with the Moonstone Misery AntiVenom as the 4-drops. I think that Speed was an unsung hero in that deck. Based on Speed Moonstone, that's a lot of points. Speed Ancient one is even more points. So you need the option to be able to go tall in a lane in Victoria Hand, because a lot of Victoria Hand's strength is in going wide. Speed allows you to go tall. It's also pretty unexpected with the Ancient one, because you can play Speed plus the Tal Mandala on 6 with only the Ancient one set up. They're going to be thinking you're copying a Victoria Hand. They're not going to realize you're copying a Speed. That's some information asymmetry that basically lets you be able to have a surprising amount of points in the lane because you have both of them on the field in a Tal Mandala. They don't know which is getting copied, and most of the time they can't play around going tall or going wide. So using game sense, you can probably find an effective play that will beat them based on them not expecting you Tal Mandalaing the right card. Frigga goes in a Victoria Hand deck. This girl is copying a Victoria Hand. She's copying a demon. That's basically the card. I think that this card is very good, and you can't really cut it in a Victoria Hand list. I think that what it does is it allows you to pop off in these high rolls, which is extremely important for this deck, because this deck, when it goes tall, it goes really tall, and it's really hard to interact with if you're the opponent, because of how less vulnerable you are to Killmonger than other Victoria Hand decks. I think that this card is definitely something you can't cut, you cannot replace. What she does in this deck is she basically allows you to copy the Victoria Hand and get a generated Victoria Hand. That's powerful. Copying a demon to get an extra card for Victoria Hand to buff, that's also pretty good. Nothing much I can really say here other than good card. Synergizes with V-Hand really well. I mentioned this in my podcast, 8 Cube Circus, which you should watch if you haven't already. It's up on this channel. I thought the Ancient One buff was one of the most significant parts of the OTA, and after about a week, it's already starting to show signs of how impactful it really is. This card now with Quinjet goes from its spell costing 2 to costing 1. That's a 50% reduction as opposed to the 33% reduction beforehand. That number is pretty significant. Being able to have this at a 1 cost instead of a 2 cost with your Quinjet reduction makes your lens so much smoother. With speed, it allows you to go tall and wide with Victoria Hand as well. This card basically enables your pop-offs. It's scary for your opponent because they don't know when you're going to Ancient One or what you're going to Ancient One, especially if you don't have either of your ongoing cards on 6 and you're planning on playing the ongoing card and Tal Mandala in the same lane, which is one of the sneaky good parts of this deck. This card basically allows you to have some information asymmetry and really allows you to choose your points allocation on turn 6, which is one of the biggest strengths of this deck, is that you're not really, the 2 lanes you're committing to, you're winning. And you can win 3 with this deck, but it's mainly a 2-lane deck. You can really choose where you want your power to go based on what you think your opponent's going to play. I think it's a little bit harder to play than a traditional Victoria Hand list with like Cape Bishop, but I definitely think the Ancient One adds enough value in making it harder to play because it's so strong that it's definitely worth including in the deck. So I started playing ramp decks in about March of this year with the Danish iteration of Hela, and while talking to Danish a few months later, he mentioned that he thought Luna Snow was a very good card, but he did not have the card, so he couldn't really deck build with it for ramp purposes. I did have the card, and I started really working on my ramp deck building recently, and I think that this card is very strong, and I've been able to try to fit this card in as many decks as I can because of how strong I think this ramp is and smoothing out curves. Even if you're not going for these big 6 drops or 5 drops, you're just smoothing out your curves so much easier with ramp by just being far ahead of your opponent. I think that this card is what makes the deck work. You're running a high cost curve, so you're running 2 4-drops, a 5-drop. That's pretty heavy for a Victoria Hand deck. You really need the extra energy, whether it being playing IU on 4, playing V-Hand Frigga on 4, playing like V-Hand Misery on 5, playing 2 IU Stones and a Tal Mandala on 5. This card really shines when it comes to smoothing out your curves, making your lines work. Without Luna Snow, these lines almost work, but they don't quite work. With Luna Snow, these lines work. And especially if you're using Luna Snow energy and you have 7 on turn 6 with the Quinjet discount, you can do some pretty ridiculous things, like miserying an IU Power Stone into Demon in a second IU Stone with a Victoria Hand on the board. That's pretty strong and not something your opponent can beat quite easily. I mean, 17 in one lane and then 17 in another lane, all while you already committed a few points to those lanes earlier. you're adding like 30, 40 power at the end of the game, this card allows you to sort of pop off, and the pop-offs are very important in this deck. If you're not popping off, you sort of need your opponent to be running a lower points ceiling deck, and when you're popping off, you can match up with those like top point ceiling decks. Like I know I've beat Bullseye Discard a few times with my crazy pop-offs without even interacting with them with Shadow King, which was pretty cool. Luna Snow basically smooths your curve. She allows you to ramp and run a heavier curve. I think that this card is extremely strong. I think it's one of the best 3-drops in the game, to be honest, because of what it brings at the 3/6 stat line too, so it's running with upside as well. I think that this card is very good. I think it smooths out your curve, and I think you should be seeing it more when you're either building or using your Victoria Hand decks. This card is also core, I think, in any Infinity Ultron deck, just because getting up that card on 4 is very strong. Before I talk about AntiVenom, I just want to sort of mention, this is the 12th card of the deck. I haven't found a card that sort of replaces what I want AntiVenom to be doing in my deck, but I definitely think this is card number 12. That being said, this card is still very good in this deck. This card synergizes extremely well with Infinity Ultron, because being able to AntiVenom a card and then playing that card and IU guarantees you'll get both stones and your draw, which is a pretty important interaction for this deck. I think that, as well as that, AntiVenom really shines in the matchups where you sort of need to cheat out something on 6, whether it be AntiVenoming a Misery and going Misery into a Shadow King. That's strong. Playing cards that are like an Infinity Ultron that got AntiVenom, you have the option to Shadow King it or just use the 2 bodies that you get for Victoria Hand. I think that this card, although being the 12th card of the deck, it's still doing enough in the deck, and it's still justified by running the Shadow King, that it's definitely warrants a place in this deck, although I think it is weaker in the deck compared to the other 11 cards, where I think are pretty set. I think that if you really wanted to make a swap, or if you wanted to tune this deck to your own liking, this is definitely the card you want to look into. We're playing the HUD, and 4/9 is a little bit ridiculous. That's all I need to say about Misery to justify this card in the deck. What this card also does is, this is your pop-off card. This card allows you to go obscenely tall, whether it be frigging a Victoria Hand and then using Misery to copy the Victoria Hand again using the frigate second proc, or whether it be Miserying the Hood to get 2 demons and leaving a 4/9 body there. This card is a little bit ridiculous, I think. I think this is sort of like not... I don't know how to really put it in words, because I didn't expect this card to get buffed. I would have expected a nerf before buff with this card, because I thought 4/8 was pretty balanced. 4/9 is a little bit ridiculous. It's the reason I came back to this deck after trying some sort of other decks. I think that Misery and the Ancient One buffs were enough warrants returning to this list and trying to fine-tune it, which I ended up doing. But I think that Misery, the card, is a little bit ridiculous, and what she allows you to do with the Hood and Frigga is definitely good. Some sneaky interactions you can do with this card is with the Infinity Ultron stones. Miserying a Power Stone, if you know you need Infinity Ultron to win, you can save Misery for 6 and do like Misery a Power Stone into like a demon. And that's also very powerful things to be doing with this, because Miserying a Power Stone takes IU to 24 instead of 12, which cannot be understated how much a plus 12 in a lane really is valuable. I think that this deck doesn't work without Misery. This card is probably the best card in the deck, just because of how much stuff it enables. This card is a little bit ridiculous, I think. It's definitely very strong and core to the deck, and I don't really think you can play it without it. My second favorite card in the entire game at this point, Infinity Ultron, is very good with Quinjet. I think that reducing the stones cost to 1 is very strong. And you can get usage out of pretty much all 5 stones. Mind Stone is extremely strong with the other stones like Mind Stone Reality Stone, Mind Stone Power Stone, Mind Stone Green Stone. That's all very good. The other things you can do with this deck with Infinity Ultron is orange blue isn't bad. Like, I've won a lot of games with orange blue. Blue is the most underrated of the Infinity Ultron stones. That card is really a game winner, I think, and it's very sneaky because nobody ever plays around it. Soul Stone is 2 cost and often 9 power in this deck. It's one of the best stones, which is a little crazy to say. But I think the best stone is definitely the Purple Stone. Being able to turn your 5/6 into a 5/12 with only 1 energy investment, so I guess you could say 6/12, is very strong, especially because the thing that's doubling it is getting buffed by the card your deck is built around. I built this deck originally as a Victoria Hand Infinity Ultron deck because I think it was a very powerful thing to be doing. This sort of deck really proved to me that I was correct in identifying that synergy was powerful. I think that this card is sort of your plan A. It's not as good as Misery in the Hood, but with Lunar Ramp, you can run both strategies in this deck, which I think is phenomenally powerful, and I definitely think that IU deserves a spot in this deck. I don't really think you can cut him for Cape Bishop because you're really opening up your vulnerability to tech. IU is a very, very, very difficult card to tech against because it throws Prio a lot of the time with that 5/6 stat line, and it sort of gives you your opponent a massive range of stuff they can do. You could say that you only lose to, say, Orange Stone, but it is a 1 in 3 that you just lose now, but you sort of have to stay, and your opponent knows what they have and what can sort of beat you, but you don't know that. So I definitely think IU is a powerful card, and I think he's core to the deck. I think that this deck was really built around him, and if you were going to cut him, you need to make a lot of changes to this deck. So now I want to talk about sort of my deck building choices within this deck, why they are what they are, and this deck's general strategy and game plan. So this deck was sort of built around the Infinity Ultron Quinjet interaction, and as a consequence, this deck wants very low to the ground Victoria Hand targets. I mentioned it multiple times in the card by card breakdown, but the emphasis on your Victoria handed buff cards to cost 1 is extremely apparent and strong in this deck. You need these cards to cost 1 to be able to, say, play 4 of them plus a Shadow King on the final turn of the game, or with Lunar Ramp, 4 of them plus a Speed, or 5 of them plus a Shadow King on the last turn. What you really need in this deck is low to the ground curve for your V-Hand cards, so you can afford to run high cost cards in your base deck. This is the sort of heaviest on curve a Victoria Hand deck I think can reasonably get, with 1 5-drop and 2 4-drops, and it's only possible because I have ramp in the deck. I think that with this deck you have 2 main game plans, which is to ramp and smooth out your pop-off lines, and also to, on your lower to the ground lines, be able to generate as many 1 costs that get buffed by your Victoria Hand as possible, so you can play them all and either a Speed or a Shadow King on the final turn of the game. I think the Ancient one, having its Town on Dollar reduced from 3 to 2, opened up the ability to run a second payoff for it, and I think that this deck really leverages Quinjet a lot. If you're looking to beat this deck, I think the best way to beat it is by virtue of Mobius or Killmonger. I think that Killmonger is strong because it does stop you from playing the demons, so it gives you less sort of cards you can Killmonger. And if you have Killmonger and Mobius, all their Victoria Hand cards now cost 2 or even 3 if Mirage gets a bad hit. And you don't really have the demons to be playing, it really slows their game plan down a lot. What I generally think with this deck, though, is I think it's definitely harder to play because there's a lot of thinking ahead on what you're going to do the turn and the turn after. So if you're playing on 4, you got to really be thinking what you're doing on 5 and 6. And I think that it's a sort of unique build because it leverages both ramp elements of Marvel Snap as well as cost reduction elements and sort of combo elements with the Ancient one. So it's using a lot of different elements of Marvel Snap to sort of come together and make this one unified Victoria Hand deck. I think it's definitely not a beginner deck, so if you're a newer player trying to hit Infinite and you don't really want to put a lot of time into learning the lines of a deck, I definitely don't recommend this deck. I think it's definitely harder to play than most Victoria Hand decks, just by virtue of there being so many lines and you're needing to think multiple turns ahead. However, if I think you're willing to put the time into this deck, or your experience with Victoria Hand or ramp styles of decks, I definitely think this is probably the strongest Victoria Hand build right now. I think that what this deck offers is a lot harder lines, but it's also a lot harder to interact with meaningfully. As I mentioned, to really stop this deck, you need to be running Killmonger and Mobius, which is quite a big ask, running 2 3/3s in a deck. I think that what this deck is able to do is put out points at a good amount. It has enough interaction with the Shadow King that it is going taller than a lot of the mid-range stuff in the metagame, while sort of being resistant enough to a lot of the tech stuff that it just places it in a phenomenal spot. If I had to give this deck a tier rating, I'd probably say it's in the low end of tier 1. I think that it's not one of the... I think it's one of the best things to be doing, but not one of the things I would consider, like, you have to have an answer to this deck. I think that it's very good, but I don't think it's to the point where it's going to run a meta game based on it. I'd give it, say, 4 stars out of a deck. I think it's a great deck, but I wouldn't really say that this is what deck the meta game is going to, like, conform to and confine around, similar to how it did against, like, Thanos and now sort of tech decks right now. Let's get into a game with this deck. I've played a few games before, but we played against Negative and another combo deck, which this deck is pretty bad against, so I really wanted to showcase one game where we're sort of getting the stuff that we want to be getting in this deck. We discard the Shang-Chi, we discard our Hood. That is likely bad for us, just because of the virtue of how important Hood is in our deck and how important Shang-Chi is in their deck. We're not a deck that dies to Shang-Chi. See, it's very bad. Kalos is absolutely terrible when losing the Hood. We're playing Merlin. I'm assuming they're playing some style of heck. We get a Hood back. Everything's alright. They're not playing the tech. I thought they were, I guess. So, this is pretty good for me. Being able to Victoria Hand plus the Ancient one next turn is strong. I want to be Lunating on this location, though. There's the Werewolf by Night, so we want to put a lot of our effort into winning the vault now. Infinity Ultron might be the best top deck there. This is so strong. I am considering snapping. Problem is there a problem? Depends on what we get with our Infinity Ultron stones, and if we top deck a Shadow King. This is definitely a snappable hand. Change the vault into Space Throne. So now they need to match quite a lot of points there without knowing if I have the Power Stone. This is so very good for me. Misery is incredible. Even not Misery is incredible here. We're able to play Victoria Hand, the Ancient one, and the Hood. All on the same turn. And we get a Quinjet. I don't actually think Quinjet is what we really want to be doing here. I think the Hood is just slightly better. So that's what we're going to be playing. We're going to be playing the Ancient one here and the Hood here to get the buff. And I do not think we're going to snap. It's because we do not have the Shadow King. But if I did have a Shadow King instead of an AntiVenom in hand, I would be snapping this hand. The Versal is very fine for us. We are in the business of Shadow King and win the game. We have a 1 in 4. If not, we probably have to leave. But we'll see. There we go. That's the card we're really looking for. Definitely time undoubling this. Are we? We are. The question is, where does the werewolf end up? Does the werewolf end up left? I don't think so. Does it end up right? I'm not sure. I think it ends up right. That is a very good sign. And ladies and gentlemen, that is going to be a win. You're going to Shadow King a 19 power werewolf down to 3. And Quinjet just gets us over the top of them in this lane, getting to a nice victory with this deck. Alright, thank you for watching. I hope this video was helpful in understanding the Infinity Ultron Victoria Hand deck and my deck building process throughout and how I sort of deck. I encourage you to kind of watch a little bit more of my content if you enjoyed. I know I have a podcast up right now, and there will be another one coming soon. So if you enjoyed this style of heavy breakdown with a lot of Marvel Snap theory and deck building consideration, make sure to subscribe to Snap Academy, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.